Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us again on a broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much for joining us again this evening. To our guests, I can see some people on YouTube and some also more coming in here on Zoom. Thank you all for being here, part of the program. Sir, I'll go right into it. Someone called you a prophet a while ago, and someone else said, no, it was apostle. But some of the things you said last week, sir, when we were talking about the referendum that was going to take place in Ukraine, some of the regions that had been occupied by the Russians. You said, what do you expect the outcome of such a referendum to be? What is your views on what has happened so far with the referendum in Ukraine?
One African dictator, and I believe he was quoting a Russian or a Soviet dictator, once said, it is not who conducts the elections, it is who declares the results that matters. When a dictator holds a referendum or an election, that's not the point. The point is, it is the dictator who declares the result. And of course, he declares whatever result he wants to declare. So, in this case, it doesn't really matter what result he declares. That is Putin. The whole process is a violation of international law. You are not supposed to conduct a referendum or an election in an area occupied by your troops. That is very, very clear. The sanctity of such a referendum calls into question all values of international law, all values of the United Nations. You cannot, having used your force to occupy territory which violates the territorial integrity and sovereignty of another country, you then cannot conduct a referendum to legitimize what you have done. It's a violation of the whole post-World War II system and values as we know it. So to that extent, no one outside the Soviet bloc, outside Russia, and one or two of Putin's allies is going to recognize the result. That is not to say that the result does not actually create dangerous realities on the ongoing conflict. Because if Putin goes through what he intends to go through, which at the end of the day will mean annexation of those territories on the basis that they voted. It doesn't even matter whether it's 51% or 98%, on the basis that people want to join Russia and therefore they are now Russian territories. The issue then is when Ukraine sends its forces into those areas in order to reclaim them, Putin is going to claim that Russian territory is now being attacked. What is he now then going to do? I mean, because the reality in the past 2-3 weeks shows Ukraine gaining upper ground or gaining upper hand in reclaiming territories which it had lost in the initial phase of this war to Russia. So I don't expect that the rapid reclamation by Ukraine is going to be deterred by the fact that elections or referendum or referenda had been held in those areas. What will Russia now do? Because so far, this is not a rhetorical question. Because so far, the United States had an understanding with Ukraine that the weapons which NATO had given Ukraine will not be used to attack Russian territory, so that the war does not really become, in reality, war between Russia and the NATO countries. But if these territories, which are formerly Ukrainian territory, and which under
I don't know what is over there. So what's your
Bear with me, sir.
please, you will have to mute everybody.
I have done so, sir.
Thank you. Territories which are formerly Ukrainian territories, but which Russia now claims that it is now Russian territories, and Ukrainian forces now move into there. Is Russia now going to claim that Russia is under attack by Ukraine, and by extension, by NATO? What would then be Russian reaction to that? Don't forget, and I think we made reference to this last week, Russia continues to threaten the use of tactical nuclear weapons. Now, tactical nuclear weapons really means, okay, you can use it to attack, say, a concentration of Ukrainian forces, and the effect of the radiation will be limited to some extent to that area, rather than a thermonuclear weapon, which will have a global effect. Is Russia still going to do that? I don't know, but I'm not really sure. Because you see, I said last week, don't disgrace Russia. A few of people who are in touch with me directly had said this could be interpreted to mean that I wanted Russia to get away with its aggression against Ukraine. No, not at all. When I said don't disgrace Russia, what I meant was that a way must be found for Russia to gracefully withdraw from what it is doing in Ukraine, short of total surrender. And that's why I called on the Pope to be the mediator, so that it is not, Russia will not be withdrawing under pressure or under intervention from a nuclear power, but Russia will be doing so out of respect for the Holy Father, to a spiritual figure. That way, Russia's face will be saved. So don't get me wrong at all. I think even for those who are on the for those who are on the sideline, who are maintaining a neutral position or a non-aligned position, I think the use of nuclear weapons may actually now be a red line for everybody, every member of the United Nations.
Thank you, sir. One point that has got a lot of people talking has been the response inside Russia to the mobilization order by Putin. Did you anticipate that the Russians would react the way they have reacted with the protests and with people leaving the country, which some have called a mass exodus?
No, I wasn't expecting it on the scale that it has taken. But I'm still not sure how to interpret it, because even if Putin was not expecting this, I mean, given the way every inch of this of Russia is controlled by security forces, within the first 5 hours of it becoming manifest that Russian citizens were living in droves, he could have ordered all the boundaries shut. He could have ordered that no Russian should be allowed to fly in the Turkish plains going anywhere. He didn't do this, and he hasn't done this. Why? Is it because he's come to the conclusion that it is better to let these dissidents leave than for him to be confronted with what is going on, for example, in Iran, where, in fact, the streets of Russia will now be scenes of violence, scenes of demonstration, that is better just to let them go. Is that why he's allowed them to go? And we can see what amounts to a vote of no confidence in him. I mean, this is clearly evidence, if you are looking for one, that Russians are in opposition to this war going on in Ukraine. Some of the countries, especially Georgia, who had its own war with Russia under Gorbachev, by the way, had become alarmed at the large numbers of the Russians coming across the border, because they believe that this may be sowing the seeds of another theater for Putin's doctrine that Russia has the right to go and protect Russian citizens wherever they are, under some illusion that they are being ill-treated. Not now, but maybe 10 years down the road, if Putin is still in power, or another Putin wants to execute the Putin doctrine that Russia has the right to go and defend all along its borders, Russians in the diaspora. So they really feel a bit uneasy about taking in this exodus, allowing this exodus into their territory. There is another angle to this. Now the United States, which is refusing to allow Mexicans, Brazilians, Cubans, people from Latin America to come across his border, is now saying he's prepared to grant asylum to Russian in the diaspora who are escaping from this war. The same thing they did when they also took in droves Ukrainians, men, women, children who left Ukraine, and they leapfrogged over South American refugees who had lined up to cross the border from Mexico into the United States. Of course, this will be an irritant to Putin, because Russians in the diaspora are out of the reach of Russian troops in terms of Putin's doctrine of using Russian troops to protect Russia. But now that Americans have said this, don't rule out actually the KGB or the KGB, that was his name when the Soviet Union was in existence. I think it's now called FSB, the Secret Service. Don't rule out now actually letting some of their men go through pretending to be dissidents and ending up in the United States now as part of Russian Secret Service that will be operating under the radar in not only the United States, but in West European countries as well.
So last week you talked about, and even before that, maybe the Pope could step in to help to bring the situation under some form of control. But given as far as Putin has gone now with this mobilization and with the kind of response that we have seen from people, like you rightly said, showing that even the nationals are not only against the war by trying to leave the country, the protests themselves are showing they don't want war. But does that mean they don't want Putin?
Of course, I mean, if the United Nations or even the Pope were to conduct a referendum, since this is the year of referendum, were to conduct a referendum in Russia as to whether Russians want Putin or not, I actually suspect that Russians will vote to have Putin. But if the question is, do you as Russians want a continuation of this war? in Ukraine. You don't be too sure if the majority, it could be a slim majority, but if the majority of Russians don't actually say, well, actually, yes, it's our territory. It's Russian territory that was lost when the Soviet Union disintegrated. We don't want Ukraine back. We don't want a war with Ukraine, but we want Russian territory to be expanded to what it was. Because the Russians have this character of liking strong leaders. Because don't forget, Russia, we seem to forget, Russia is the largest territory in the world. It's larger than the United States. It's larger than China. And I've forgotten how many time zones you're supposed to have. If you start from St. Petersburg and you go all the way to Siberia. I mean, I have traveled from the Kremlin all the way to Baku by train, and it took us, I think, all through the night before we got to St. Petersburg. But it was Leningrad at that time, and then from Leningrad, I think it took us all again. And anyway, you are dealing with a continent. You are not dealing with just a country. And so the Russians really appreciate that, the character of a strong leader, that they do need, not to put a finer point on it, they do need a dictator to hold that continental nation together. And so they because they saw what happened when right after the disintegration of the Soviet Union under Gorbachev, under, what was his name? I've forgotten the name now. They saw what happened. That was when the oligarchs took over the wealth of Russia, appropriated the wealth of Russia. That was when the mafia took over Russia, violence on the streets of almost every Russian city until Putin came in. So that's a long answer to, does it mean the Russians don't like Putin? Russians like Putin, and the majority of them may still like this war, but not 98% or 97%. Those are the figures that the dictators, put out there.
So let's talk about the gas leak. Again, that's something that you had said a long time ago, where you said one of your greatest concerns is what happens when something happens by mistake. We didn't intend to hit there, and we end up hitting it. Now, there are so many theories about the gas leak, what may or may not have happened. But how significant is the fact that such an infrastructure has now become a target of sorts? Because very few people are accepting that it was a coincidence for both pipelines to go at the same time.
Well, obviously, it wasn't a coincidence. I mean, actually, the critical question is, who did it? The pipe has been blown up in 4 different places now, and we have evidence or from the intelligence agency of Norway that actually their military capability, the laboratory they have, actually picked up those explosions before the gas started to leak. So we know it was sabotage. But that's not the problem. The problem is who did it. Have the Russians done this, and for what purpose? Or was it done by the special forces of Ukraine, and for what purpose? Or the Russians are now claiming that it was done by the Americans, because the Americans have been opposed to the pipelines, not 1, not 2, and that therefore it was the Americans who did it. Now, this precisely was the kind of situation, as you rightly said in your intro, that I have been warning about, because the Russians will have a reason for doing so, which is to, in fact, expand the parameters of the military action, and now have a justification for their heating the gas pipeline infrastructure outside their own territory in retaliation. And Norway and Sweden have said that they have seen evidence of activities by robot drones around their own, not only gas installations, but military installations, and that therefore they feel that they are under threat. Now, obviously, it's the Soviet Union who will want to expand it that far. But when I said Ukrainian special forces could be in operation, the reasoning behind that could be for Ukraine to seek to suck more European countries onto its side, who would then perceive Russia as a threat, because this is what Ukraine has been saying. It's Ukraine today, is somebody else tomorrow, and that therefore Ukraine is fighting a war to protect Europe and not just to protect Ukraine alone. Could it be, in fact, forces within Russia itself who want to overthrow Putin, and they think that by doing that, they are widening this conflict and undermining the status of Putin within Russia itself. So now you can see, whom are you going to blame? And if there is no certainty, as to who bears responsibility, then this is where countries may now start, if you like, flying in all directions to attack supposed enemies who may be innocent. Don't also forget that there are Russian agents in the United States. From time to time, they're arrested and deported. I mean, it's one of the attributes of international relations, of global relations in this world order, that you plant spies and agents in enemy territories. Could they be programmed to now attack pipelines in the United States in an effort to now say, of course, deniability, they will deny they didn't do this, that it must be opponents of Trump who now did this. It's getting messy. And believe me, it's getting too dangerous. And I think that I think if I can use the picture that we used to use in those days of the Cold War, I would say we are 10 minutes to midnight of a direct confrontation between the United States and Russia, or between NATO countries and Russia on this war. 10 minutes to 12 midnight. 12 midnight being when actually missiles and rockets and what have you will start to fly. Before I move away from this topic, I don't know if you are going to raise it, but let me say that even China is not going to be happy about this new development. India is not going to be happy about this new development. And irrespective of who may be responsible for it, I believe strongly that China and India and members of BRICS and Turkey are likely to be telling Putin, call it out. Enough. We've had this uneasy feeling about this, your adventure in the Ukraine. Now it is getting out of control. Cut it out.
Two questions I want to ask. So you mentioned something about potential spies there, and you also brought Turkey into the conversation. Now there's a question here on this is Zoom. I haven't validated it, so I'm taking it on face value here. But this person is saying, thus far, it is only President Erdogan of Turkey who is raising a flag against Putin's likely annexation of parts of Ukraine. So that's really talking about Turkey standing up to what's going on there. But in terms of the conversation around spies, this is bringing the Edward Snowden conversation to the fore. Why now? Bringing Edward Snowden and Putin now saying he's giving Russian citizenship to that. So two separate questions, but because you touched on them slightly, sir.
Yes. Well, first of all, it's not correct to say that it's only Turkey that is flying that red flag. I think that if you once Putin announced that this referendum is going to take place, almost every leader who at that point last week was addressing the United Nations was waving the flag that this will not be acceptable, that their own country will not recognize whatever result the referendum threw up. Then don't forget that there was a special Security Council meeting. You know, France is the chairman of this month's Security Council presidency. There has been a special meeting, and apart from the Russian leader who categorically throw his own punches back at members of the Security Council. Even China was a bit reticent in its own comments while trying to avoid putting the blame in any person's pocket. China was reticent in its own contribution. So really, the whole world, let me put it that way, apart from maybe Belarus and what have you, will support Russia in this. But apart from that, because you see, each country needs to be careful about this. I don't have any figures to give you, but I will not be surprised if most members of the United Nations, probably the majority, have powerful neighbors who, if this is allowed to stand, could grab their territories. And this is why not only in South America, but in Africa itself, when on the eve of independence, we all agreed, in the case of Africa, through the Organization of African Unity, and that's what it was called at that time, we all agreed that we will abide by the boundaries that we were inheriting at independence. Uti Positetis, the inheritance. Because if you start to challenge the sanctity of those boundaries, Africa, the whole of Africa, will have been up in flames as countries fight each other over amelioration and refractions of boundaries. Do you know how many countries surround Nigeria and how many frontier wars Nigeria would have been involved in if not for that doctrine that we embraced? Look at India and Pakistan. How many years have they been fighting over Kashmir? India and China over some, boundary, the uncertainty over boundary there. So really, majority members of the United Nations are not going to line up behind Russia. Some may be quiet, but most are not going to allow this to stand. The second question, do remind me.
Edward Snowden.
Edward Snowden, thank you. Well, if United States says we will now accept any Russian emigre fleeing Russia and grant them asylum in the United States, which is, as I said, Putin would regard us as an irritant, where there is an American who came here voluntarily and who is a refugee in Russia, will give him a Russian passport. So it's tit for tat. And don't forget, in all of this, we are saying that there are still and I'm going to be less diplomatic in my language here, there are still some Americans who stupidly went into Russia, even though one could see the flames of war arising. See, the one thing I don't like, I mean, about the attitude of Americans is, oh, no, don't bother me. I mean, I have my rights. I can go anywhere I want. When you then get into trouble there, you not say, well, because you're a taxpayer, the United States should now come and rescue you. The attitude never made sense to me, but then I'm not an American. Because what then happens is the United States now ends up releasing in exchange, prisoner exchange, releasing Russians whose activities in the United States are pose serious danger to American security in exchange for these American citizens who have strayed into Russia on their own, with their two eyes, open, who have then got into trouble over there. So that is true. You're going to be getting this tit for tat. How can I irritate the other side? Okay, and I'm going to irritate the other side. But I think this is no longer a game of cricket, please. Or since the world football is coming up, it's no longer, Arsenal versus Liverpool, or, it's no longer, it's gotten too dangerous. We are not. The United States, this whole thing is now not about whoever wins gets a World Cup. This is about, if things go out of hand, nearer, my God, to thee.
Sir, you said something there which I'm going to try to press you on a little bit. You talked about the Nigerian ethos and what has somewhat held Nigeria together, and hasn't been like India and Pakistan and some of those other countries. And it just occurred to me, sir, that Nigeria is going to be turning 62, I think, before our next episode. Where do you see the future of Nigeria? You've been part of the journey up till now. You've seen a lot. You've been in government. You've seen a lot in government. Where do you see the future of the country, sir?
Well, let me address the issue this way. I belong to a generation who were being offered foreign citizenship, green card, foreign passports, opportunities, what have you. And we couldn't understand why we will accept. What's even more important was that the countries that were offering us this couldn't understand. But people are dying, are fighting to come over to our country. And here we are offering you on a platter of gold, and you are rejecting it. And we say, well, yes, because we believe, my generation believed that Nigeria was destined to be great, that Nigeria was going to be a global force. And I'm talking about the early 60s, when, it was an article of faith with us that, given all these parameters, we had the population, we had a dedicated leadership, we had the natural resources, and we had the skilled personnel. We had the skilled, we seem to have cut off.
I can hear you, sir. I think we lost the video, but I can hear you, sir.
Okay. And so we came back home. And now my generation is witnessing an exodus of Nigerians going in droves, going abroad. Some of them even crossing the Sahara Desert, getting into those rickety boats to go into Europe after 5 years or more of horrors in Libya, because the Nigeria of our dreams has become the Nigeria of their nightmares.
Mm.
The only thing I can say is that all is not lost. No matter how much the Nigerian oligarchs have stolen from Nigeria, there is still so much left. And what we need is a clean and dedicated leadership. A leadership that is efficient. I'm not asking for angels to come and be leaders in Nigeria. You won't get that. But a leadership that will cut corruption maybe down to 10%, because that's what it was during the first decade of independence. And even then, that 10% Nigerian found so irritating. That is one of the reasons why we had the first coup in Nigeria in 1966, 10%. Now, the corruption is what? 95%? And I'm not using the dictator's percentage. I think if you look at the figures of illicit transfer of funds, Nigeria has the largest figure of illicit transfer of funds out of Africa. Now, I'm not surprised about that. We have the largest economy, so that should not surprise anybody. But so if we can drop it from 95% to 10% or even 15%, I think within 2-3 years, we will see a turnaround. And so, since we are going to have elections in 5 months' time, let us hope that at the end of the exercise, we will have an honest and efficient leadership, management. That's what has been lacking in our economic and in the management of our resources.
Thank you for that, sir. There are 2 questions here. I will take one first, and then I would see if the team can help me verify the other question.
I'll take both. Don't worry. I
Okay.
won't hold you responsible. I'll take both.
Okay. So this first one says, talking about carefulness, what is your view about an African president who threatened that an attack on Russia is an attack on Africa?
He doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't think we need to waste our time on that. I mean, I can understand what he's trying to say, but that's not really the way to put it. I mean, what he's saying is that his country regards Russia as a friend of Africa. I know who you are talking about. I know who said so. But I mean, I wouldn't. Yes, I do agree with him that Russia has been a less exploitative friend of Africa, who has helped in the decolonization and in the anti-apartheid struggle. And it's not to be found among those who are exploiting Africa economically. That's what led him to say that. But what's the point of saying an attack on Russia is an attack on Africa? But you know, an interesting thing, since that question raised that, it is one of the points I have said in one lecture when people have asked, how are we going to get the feet of our exploiters off our necks in Africa? And I said, let us pray to God that they are so busy elsewhere that we can then struggle and start to put our own house in order. The new president of, where now? No, the new prime minister of Italy, just yesterday, she was attacked by Macron, who accused the Italians of being irresponsible, naive, and all that kind of thing for voting for her. And she said, Emmanuel Macron, France is the irresponsible one who attacked and bombed Libya because Libya was about to reach an energy deal with Italy, which we needed. France, Mr. Macron, is the responsible one that takes 30% of the uranium resources from Niger and uses it to run its energy, can you still hear me?
I can hear you, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Uses it to run its energy resources in France, while Niger itself does not have electricity. She listed all the evils that France was doing in Africa. Now, obviously, Italy has the intelligence about what France is doing in Nigeria, in Africa. So let us hope that they knock themselves, their heads together. I'm not particularly enamored about the right wing coming to power anywhere, because I am not a right winger. But it's not helping Africa, because as they attack each other, even if it's only verbally, they are releasing data, which we already know the data. But when we talk about that data, say, oh, it's coming from an African, what do they know? But when the new Italian prime minister gives those kinds of data, then you listen, because she knows what she's talking about. They are repository of all these secrets. So to that extent, but that's a long answer to why the African president said what he said.
Yes, the second question was this. This person said, can you talk of Kosovo referendum in relation to what Putin has done? I think they're referring to what is happening in Ukraine at the moment.
No, the Kosovo referendum has to do with the disintegration of Yugoslavia. You know, the Serbian were the major ethnic group. When the civil war then started and the disintegration started, Kosovo was fighting, Bosnia, Herzegovina, they were fighting in Montenegro, and so on. But I'm not, and each side right now has been threatening, because you see, the problem with federations is like making scrambled eggs. There's no way to unscramble eggs once you scramble it. So in each province or territory, autonomous territory in Yugoslavia, you have minorities. There's no clean-cut ethnic nationality that is that does not enclose minorities within its territories, and each one is always threatening to have a referendum to either break away from. I think that's what it means by that. But if I'm wrong, perhaps it could come back with a supplementary question to correct me.
There's one last question I would throw, sir. We're a little over time, but I want to get your view on this question, sir. And it's in relation to Solomon Islands in the Pacific Islands, where they have refused to sign the summit declaration from the summit that's holding in the White House. And it's caused a lot of hoo-ha from different quarters on why they're refusing to do that. How significant is Solomon Islands in that area to draw such attention?
The charity begins at home. What China has done is to seek its embrace, to expand its embrace towards territories that are closest to it in the Pacific area. And there are all these island nations. And the fear of the island nations is actually climate control, because they are all afraid that with the swelling up of the ocean, they will disappear. And whoever it is whoever is going to help them address that they regard as their friends. And with China coming in, their relationship with China, especially Solomon Islands, China has been offering all kinds of goodies to help in their development and what have you. And all of a sudden, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Great Britain are raising alarm as to why, especially Solomon Islands, will be friends with China or will be responsive to Chinese embrace. So the summit in Washington was addressing American concerns and not the concerns of the Solomon Island people. My own fear is this, and if you read Perkins' confessions of an economic hitman. The CIA will go there. You know, for how much? $50,000. It will engineer street demonstrations against the government there for refusing to sign that agreement that the United States had prepared just to overthrow the government of Solomon Islands. But in actual fact, overthrowing that will be part of the anti-Chinese strategy and a warning to leaders of other islands in the Pacific area that if you go too close to China, this is what will happen to you.
Hmm. Well, thank you, sir. I will not take you much longer than that, but maybe next week, I'd like to get your views on Ukrainian president accusing Israel of not releasing weapons to them, specifically referring to the Iron Dome system. We'll start with that when we come back next week, sir. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you to the viewers on YouTube and to those of you who have been on Zoom here. Thank you very much for your time. Good night, all. Good night, sir.
Good night.